credentialing are two key components that I don't think we talk enough about. We're always quick to talk about detect and avoid and all the sexy technology that goes with our industry, but it's really, how are you going to fly? Where are you going to fly? What are your capabilities as a pilot? And then when we start to look at more complex operations, there's a security element to that as well. So how do you protect data? Airspace design for urban canyons is going to be different than airspace design for rural operations where you're doing photography, or even if you compare the safety criticality to urban environments versus pipeline inspection. There are some commonalities there. Levels of trust need to increase, capabilities need to increase as part of the platforms and the pilots. And these are things that we sort of talk about, but I don't think we give enough credence and airtime to.
You touched on something too, urban canyons, right? Micro weather in cities. The aviation weather products right now are for manned aviation.
Don's on here, so don't say all that, Ron. He's paying attention. So.
But it's absolutely true, though. I mean, what good is a mandate? It's great to have the big picture, but I'm operating in New York City or New Brunswick or whatever, Philadelphia. I think it's more important to understand how the winds flow through that city, rather than, a manned aviation weather report. There's nothing geared towards the smaller stuff that is, will definitely impact the safety of a flight. And again, you're hitting all the points with pilot proficiency, professionalism. What's the training pipeline look like? When does that standard come out? It's not just 107. It's professional pilots. How do we develop that flight attitude? And not just from a college that has an aviation credential in its name. It's where do we start with all this?
Let me give a plug to USI on that, right, Ron? USI, our friends over at USI have that. It's a credentialing program that allows you to effectively work your way up, just like you would work your way up from the Cessna to the Twin to the Jet, and be credentialed for it. I think it's really, really important that we have something like that, especially as Josh likes to put it. Josh Olds from USI, he says you have more kinetic energy, more kinetic mass you're dealing with now. It's like you've got to be able to handle that larger and larger aircraft. And I think that pilot training piece that the USI certification is bringing is pretty important. I don't know if anybody else is doing it, but I know USI is doing it out there.
So it's interesting. When we were talking about that in pilot credentialing, Ray, I wasn't even thinking about smaller drones, the small UAS moving our way up to where you're flying Predators. I wasn't thinking about that kind of progression. I was actually thinking about how does that impact the priority of it, right? So does somebody who is credentialed better, higher, whatever you want to call it, than somebody else who's received more training, even for the small UAS, does that person at some point get higher priority to access the airspace because of their training, or are they entitled to do more complex operations? I was thinking it even that way. I wasn't thinking of scale size wise. I was thinking of capabilities and how does that go and influence what the drone, what the UTM is actually all about. So when I file that flight plan, do I put down recreational 30 hours or do I put down certified 3,000? And then somewhere that says, hey, Ray's got 3,000, his mission will get priority, or we'll allow him to do something that's a little quote unquote riskier, right, in a more complex airspace, right? So that's the way I was looking at that.
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at how standards have evolved in, let's call it the oceanic airspace, right? You went from 120-mile separations to 60-mile separations to 30-mile separations with MNPS and beyond, because the aircraft were able to maintain tighter tolerance on the routes, and you could run that with a combination of technologies. You could tighten up the separation standards. So I almost wonder if it becomes a risk-based model where if you are less proficient, you require a larger buffer than the others. If you're more proficient, you maybe can pack more airplanes into a volume, into an operational volume, because you're allowed to, because you can manage them. So I don't know. I know we can look at risk all different ways. You can look at risk, pilotage risk as risk of flying the thing controlled into the ground, or you can look at it as being able to maintain within your service volume and tighter service volumes, or maybe maybe if there's tighter corridors in cities and stuff like that, you have to have a certain level of proficiency to fly those corridors. Instead of just letting the average guy who just picked up the drone at Walmart fly that corridor, right? So interesting concept. I never really thought of it until now, Tony. That was pretty fascinating. Just thinking about it, you know.
Well, it's really, and two, I mean, you know, if you start to apply the RNP concept to drones, right? So the more capable craft, the more capable flight crew, pilot, or whomever the person may be, I think that's where you can start to open up a lot more of these possibilities, but we got to work towards that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just looking through the comments here. We haven't gotten any questions yet, so I just
Oh,
want to.
well, actually, we do. Brandon's got a question in here, and I think it probably for Ron. If you want to go in there to the Q&A in the open area, talking specifically about first responders and what they're arriving on scene. So you may want to take a look at that, because you know that's interesting, and we haven't even mentioned that as a use case, really. You know, aside from the fact that Ron's with us and mentioned that, so we may want to take a look at that and see what the thought is with it.
So
I just promoted Brandon up to a panelist here, so he can actually talk with us directly about this.
hey, Brandon, how are you?
Hey guys, thanks for having me, and sorry for the book, but I'm just sitting here, you know, ruminating on all these different things, and just got me thinking.
So talk about your question here.
Yeah, so my question is really around, you know, eventually there are going to be in-air emergencies or you know, some sort of collision despite our best efforts, and you know, our company is focused around getting first responders the best possible information as fast as possible. And so I'm just curious, are there platforms, are there technologies that are automating getting that data to dispatch centers, you know, PSAPs, or does it all have to go through the air traffic controller? And if it does, how are they going to be able to handle that type of data and get it in an effective way, you know, transfer it without any kind of loss or minimal loss?
I don't.
Oh, I think we lost Ron there.
Didn't pay his internet bill.
I wasn't sure if it was just me. He was glitching
That's because we don't pay him anything to be on this panel. You know what I'm saying? If you're paying him a few dollars, he'd be able to keep on it.
Give him our returnables so he can pay for his internet. Yeah.
So Brandon, you're talking about from a UTM perspective, or a, like, I mean, like, so is this helicopters? Is it future eVTOLs, or is it UAS? What are we talking about?
Well, anything that has a passenger on it that may not be qualified to talk over a radio to an air traffic controller was really my thought. So somewhere at the intersection between UTM and AAM.
So interestingly enough, I mean, if you're talking about something large enough to take a person, I would think it would fall under the UAM concept, right? I mean, it's going to be passenger carrying, and there's the whole UAM ConOps kind of dictates that if you're not operating within a corridor, you're going to be operating under the air traffic control system, or under whatever, if you're outside of controlled airspace, obviously. So you're saying that you don't think there's going to be a way to communicate with the pilot on these things if you need to go through an air traffic control, a controlled airspace, and get to where you got to go? Is that what you're talking about?
I think my headspace is just around whereas normally you'd have a destination and an origin for airport, and if it was, let's just say, for example, like a smoke in the cockpit, right? You'd have an ARF department that could support them, and you know, you'd know the plane was going to whatever strip, right? But if you're in an urban setting, you're relying on municipal resources or, you know, local resources. So how do you get that rich data set about the aircraft and then train those guys while they're en route, right? Because this is like an education thing for them.
I can tell you how it works at Newark Airport if a plane goes down off airport. Okay, we have a crash phone that we pull that actually doesn't just go to the local, the ARF guys on the field, but it actually engages the Newark Airport or the Newark City Fire Department, Police Department. I believe Elizabeth is on there also. So we pull that phone and it's a legit emergency. We can talk to those people along the line. So, you know, let's just say an aircraft crashed 2 miles on final at runway 4 right. They're crashing. They could be crashing on Staten Island for all I know, but they're probably like in Elizabeth someplace. We could interact directly with them, and we would funnel the information verbally to them. I would think if it was further off scene, it's just a matter of, you know, after the aircraft is located, the information has to be passed through the air traffic control system or the airline. But if you're talking about like a general aviation crash or something like that, let's just say it's a passenger carrying drone crash or whatever it is, there's currently no automated way to send that information to the responding facility or responding entity.
I was hoping you'd say there's an app for that, but I guess it hasn't been invented yet.
So, yeah, well, you're trying to create it, obviously, Brandon. So one thing, when I read your question, and Frank, you may have some thoughts on this. I was thinking about a black box, right? Like on an aircraft, you've got a black box, and that's collecting information, whether the pilot is actually on a radio or not. There's information that's being collected. And I think, I don't know, and Frank may, I am pretty sure that information is being relayed down to the airline operations center, you know, depending upon how that all connection works. So conceptually, with what you're talking about, you could, again, have that type of black box on a drone that's transmitting that type of information. Right. So the first, and obviously it would have to be connected somehow, because somebody's got to be that third party between taking that information out and translating it over to the appropriate authorities, right? Your first responders, all that. So I can see that happening. But the one thing about that, and my frame of reference tends to be around small UASs, that's more equipment on a very small vehicle. So if you got to put an ADS-B or some other type of radio, you know, remote ID device, and now we're talking about a black box, those type of things probably won't happen. But with your you know, the AAM, with the urban air mobility, and you're talking about, you know, 2 passengers, 6 passengers, something like that, I absolutely see that somebody can build a mousetrap that works and does that. You know, so maybe that's how I was interpreting what you were saying.
Yeah. So what I took away from that is right now it happens through the existing communication protocol with air traffic control and the operator themselves.
Well, air traffic won't get, so for the off nominal, and Ray and Tony, you got, this is what you do and have done. So from an air traffic perspective, you're not getting performance information about the craft itself. You're getting the off nominal situation reported by the pilot to tell you that there's something wrong. Right?
And we're picking up a phone.
Radio, right?
Yeah, we're picking up a phone, Frank. I mean,
everything's over the frequency, and then these guys are like, oh shit, something's going on. Oh, sorry, I swore on recording.
That's okay. You can say whatever kind of crap you want on this thing.
Oh no, something's going on. So let me, as Ray said, pick up the crash phone and take care of it. So in the airline industry today, modern aircraft are there's all kinds of data analytics and recording and performance characterizations that are being collected and sent to airline operations center. Thales, as a large company, we do that actually for several airlines. We have an operations center in Orlando, and we're monitoring everything from if your display is working or not working in your in-flight entertainment system, so we can figure out that 17B. Not that you'd want to be in a middle seat, but 17B, your display is not working. So when that aircraft arrives in Orlando or in Las Vegas or in LAX, we'll be able to dispatch a crew to go fix that as part of the in-flight entertainment. We're also monitoring engine information, performance characteristics of the aircraft, ADS-B data en route to figure out what the weather is like, what the headwinds are, to improve the performance of flight planning and the aircraft as it flies. And a lot of these not necessarily the smaller drones, but even the medium-sized 50 to 100-pound drones, there's a huge amount of information that can be collected from these different craft to improve. And Don, shout out to you, the micro weather information to improve performance of that particular mission, or even battery usage, et cetera. So we have to think about, and you're right on that, you know, to be able to share information if it's emergency or otherwise, but these are flying data collectors, right? And an Internet of Things device. And as they fly, they're going to collect a whole bunch of stuff that we can then use to make the airspace system more efficient, and then get towards not having a static airspace model, but a very dynamic one to allow operators to shift their operations, which we kind of do today in air traffic, but it's a delayed approach to doing that, to one that's almost near real time. So we're not that far off. These are some of the benefits of the drone world and how it's going to improve manned aviation is taking advantage of some of these changes in technology and flying sensors and stuff. But you know, the current situation that you described is all very manual today.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Got it, Brandon. Thank you for the question. That was fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Let me figure out how to de-escalate you from the thing here.
You're getting voted off the island.
Yeah, let me vote you off here. Hold on. I think I got to push this button here. And,
Clear him to the next sector, Ray. He's out.
Interesting, Frank, that it goes two ways, right? It's not always coming from manned aviation to drone work, that space. We have stuff to learn from unmanned that maybe aviation really hasn't thought about. We can integrate something, improvements to what we're already doing. Again, two-way street.
we're gonna bring Don up here because Don keeps coming in here. He keeps
He's
trying
blowing
to.
up your chat room with the weather stuff. So,
Here's
Chirping.
Don.
He's
what he's got to
chirping.
contribute.
There he goes. He didn't do
Don,
his
you
hair.
there?
He didn't do his hair today.
Well, you know.
Oh no, I'm okay. I don't look any worse than Frank. How you guys doing?
You're the only one with a worse camera angle than I have.
Yeah, well, I wasn't prepared to get on screen.
That's how we work these things, right? You got to be prepared at all times, like a Boy Scout.
How you guys doing? No, I'm enjoying the call outs on the weather stuff. And Frank was right on the mark when he talked. Every drone should be a weather sensor. That's my motto. And and get me that data and watch what we can do with it, because the biggest gaps we have are above the ground here. We have more weather data above 5,000 feet in the atmosphere than we do from the surface to 3,000 feet. And so filling it with sensors and getting us the data and letting us do our machine learning and figuring out where our models suck today and how we can improve those by tweaking with that data and getting that back out to the end user. You're going to see better battery power optimization. You're going to see less downtime due to uncertainty. You're going to see more utilization rates. You'll see some safety too, right? People won't be running their battery out and having a ditch. But the main point I wanted to make earlier was, you're talking about pilot training, and even today, manned aviators and manned pilots, when you're flying a drone, you're not on the airplane, and you're standoff away from it. You're basically weather blind. Right. I mean, there's not, our data is not that good. I mean, I guess some pilots will tell you that, and I know you air traffic controllers would love to remind me of that, right? So, most pilots get out of trouble get us out of trouble, get me out of trouble for a bad forecast, right? When they run into something they don't expect, they're not going to know what's out there, So this is why it's a totally different mindset about piloting. It's a totally different, you really got to understand more about the quality of the products you're using. You just can't say, oh, the weather guy sucks. You got to say, weather guy sucks. Now I need to understand how he sucks. Because if you don't understand those limitations, then you're just flying blind, So I guess that's my spiel for today.
So it's another piece of telemetry, right? So as Tony was saying, you start adding more and more stuff to these very small vehicles with limited battery power. How much data can we send back to the system from these drones? How much can we mandate? We're already mandating RID, which is probably going to consume power. I'm not technically skilled enough or schooled enough to know exactly what you can and can't do. But the fact of the matter is, in the current air traffic control system, you're right, we get PIREPs, we get all kinds of information back from all the airplanes that are in the air. So we know what the upper level currents are and everything like that. We can predict, just how long it's going to take to go from New York to LA, because we pretty much know what it looks like for everybody in front of you. So how do we get there? Is this a critical piece of integration, especially in, let's call it the canyons of a New York City or Houston or Los Angeles, where there's buildings around, where every drone that's flying through those eddies and currents as they go through between the buildings should be giving something back? Or is it a sensor network like Don has, that has to be deployed among these canyons to send the data to the drone operators to know what their flight planning is going to look like. Are they going to need more power? Are they going to catch updrafts, downdrafts? You know, how does this work from an integration standpoint into the NAS, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're here for. You know, anybody who wants to weigh in on that, go for it, because I'm lost. I don't even know how this works.
Well, Frank promised me he's going to get me all the weather data off of the drones. That's what he told me. That's why I'm working with him. Is that something I should, did he sell me the bridge in Arizona? You know,
Did you hear that bus coming?
no, let me just say on the weather side, I don't know if you can mandate it. And so, but it's going to be a combination of mobile measurements from IoT sensors off of drones that want to play in the game. We got to encourage drone operators that it's to their advantage to put a pitot tube or whatever it is on that aircraft, because we're going to get you back much more, optimized productivity out of that aircraft, because the data we're going to take and learn from that is going to feed back in the system. Plus, we are working with NASA on a urban weather sensing infrastructure testbed project. We were selected by NASA for this. We're going to be setting up wind lidars and sonic anemometers in an urban area. We're trying to figure out which city it's going to be. And I would love to have drones part of that, where we could do some proof of concept of taking some data, seeing if drones can give us what we need. You can back wind data out of, obviously, from telemetry and flight control system data. But the problem is it's a very model-based problem. So it's not scalable. But yeah, I think, I don't think we're ever going to be able to tell drone operators now maybe we could tell larger drones, that are flying at 3,000 feet through weather, that they need to have some weather sensors on them, because, the business model makes more sense maybe to them to do that. But I don't think the smaller ones will be able to do it. We're just going to have to get folks we have to figure out how to incentivize them and feed it into the system. That's my belief, but
Well, let's look at another business model. I mean, is there a business model there where you're actually flying a drone laden with sensors every half an hour and sending that data back, specifically designed drones, sending that data back to a network that then tracks it, and you get sort of real-time data on the weather? Is that a potential business model to attach to a service provider?
Yeah. So Ray, I didn't even think about that. I think that's actually a really good idea. And I was kind of where Don was as he was speaking. One of the things I was thinking of was all that weather sensing data that we've got on top of buildings and everything else, to kind of help figure out what the picture is. You got to drop it down. Somehow you have to drop it down. And I don't know what that looks or feels like, Don.
yeah.
Put it on some, you rent space from a building and you put it on the side of the building instead of the top of the building, whatever that might look like.
Smart cities. We want to be on there. We want to be on the smart city infrastructure. So we're working with the Autonomous Institute, and we're trying, what we want to do. And this is where we can, people that understand what we're trying to do, like you, if you could go out when you're talking to people and they're talking smart city, they're putting out 5G network, tell them, hey, build some weather sensors into the infrastructure now. It's a lot cheaper for us to do it now. And that's what we're doing with NASA. We're going to be demonstrating some of that. And to go back to, what Ray was saying earlier, the business model, right, is what, remind me what you're saying, Ray, because I wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, so I was basically saying, right, so you have, different services that are not essential services you're going to hang off.
Oh, the drone, the flying weather drone.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so we're building that. We had another NASA SBIR. We're building what I call the Weather Scout. And the whole idea is to do exactly what you said. We want to fill the gaps. You don't have to send it up every day. You send it up as a targeted platform. You get it. If we can convince some of these OEMs or, some of these drone delivery companies to have a fleet of them, that we tell them when to launch them. They don't have to launch them every day. You just launch them when we need it. And one of the things we're working on too is standoff distance, having a payload where we can detect icing in the cloud at a standoff distance. Right now, there's no such capability, and it's using a passive radiometer. So we'd be able to fly that thing and say, is there icing in those clouds without us having to go in? Think about if we know whether or not there's icing in a cloud or not, how much that will increase aircraft utilization. Because today, how much are we even grounding manned aviation from flying when we're not certain about if there's icing, right? If there's severe icing, right? A lot of the grounding we do, probably about 40% of it's unnecessary because we just don't have the data. If we can get the data, we can close these gaps. So yeah, you're right on the mark, Ray. I think, we think there's a business model, obviously. NASA thinks there might be a business model. And those are kinds of innovative ways we're looking at trying to close these gaps. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be really useful even for manned aviation, low altitude manned aviation.
Right.
We were flying
Helicopters.
out there.
Yeah.
Before the helicopter charter operations like HFS want to go out and pick up somebody in Manhattan and fly them to, I don't know, wherever they're going to fly them to, let's say it's in the wintertime, they might want to know what the icing level is, right? They might want to know that 500 feet, there's a cloud deck, and just, you know, you touch that, you're getting ice on the rotors, right? So really, really important stuff, Don. I think the weather piece is huge, especially with the weights of these vehicles and the fact that, you know, it doesn't take 50 knots of wind to knock them off like an aircraft. It takes 20 knots of wind, right? And we had it all the last couple of days. I was up in the control tower today, gusting to 20, 25 knots, right? So can you fly? Can you not fly? Is it at certain, you know, you see it, Tony would know, you see it coming down the final. You watch the airplanes down the final, you get these wind shifts coming down the final, you get compression, you get to realize where the layers are and how those layers change during the day. And if, you know, if you could know that as a drone operator, especially if you're like Amazon, you're flying 1,000 drones across, across the way, and now you're going to run out of battery power by the time you get to your last delivery. It's pretty valuable stuff, right? Look, guys, we're at 6 o'clock, and we can go longer. As a matter of fact, you know, I'd like to because I forgot to record the first half of the thing. So, yeah, I told Ron to remind me, so it's Ron's fault. I said, Ron, remind me to push the record button, and he didn't do it. But anyway. If you guys want to stay on and talk more, we can. I understand if you can't, but this is a great conversation.
Right.
Yeah, I got about another 5 minutes. I'm trying to cultivate the next generation of aviators. My son's in Civil Air Patrol, so I'll need to get him out to get moving on his pilot's license that I won't have to pay for.
Yep.
Well, that's fantastic. So why don't we do this? Why don't we just start to walk out on this right now, and we'll just say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Don. Thank you, everybody who's here. Jacob, everybody who participated. I saw Ralph Tamboro on before, and Jan Adams was on. Jan was on. She popped in. At least it said she was on. This was fantastic. We could probably talk for like 3 hours about this stuff. I'd love to do this again. I really didn't even get into talking about integration between the UTM system and the NAS and programmatically how that would work. I know there's going to be a whole other piece of NAS architecture that has to be built onto this, whether it's like a swim-like model that would be built onto FTI or something like that. I have no idea how it's going to look, but I'd love to talk more about that. Maybe there's a whole nother one of these webinars that we could talk about that.
There's a huge gap, Ray, in information. I mean, we just talked about that with weather, right? So if true integration into the NAS is going to be totally and completely dependent on how the information flows between whatever user it is and the other users. You know, I mean, you've got to be able to have common situational awareness of what's going on around you, whether there's 5 drones heading down Main Street or whether, you know, the drones are higher and they're more into the more traditional man thing. You've got to be able to get the information flow, and it's got to be timely. I mean, that's going to be one of those critical steps we've got to work through.
Yeah, I'd love to have a conversation about what that architecture looks like too, right? We're talking about an internet-based architecture, IP-based architecture that, according to the UTM ConOps, and we've got our own architectures within the NAS, even though we're transitioning to IP on the FTI, but I mean, there's a whole game that's got to be played there to make that information compatible, right? So how are we going to do that? I mean, let's talk about it another time, right?
Frank probably's got all this stuff down because bandwidth. I mean, where's all this bandwidth going to come from when you got all this information flow that's happening? You know, I mean, really lots of questions.
Yeah, I see just another Mike Syracuse is on here, and he's been popping in here talking about some stuff. Mike, we'll have to get to you next time, and maybe we can have something out here you can get on. We can promote you up to a panelist. But thank you again to Ron Leach Strategic Partners for his sponsorship, HHI Heliport, and Jeff Hyman. The only way we keep these things going and pay for the Zoom webinar thing is with those guys. So
real quick before you go, Ray, we're going to be in the Interdrone in August in Dallas this year. So if anybody's going out there, let us know. We'd love to meet you in person, have a conversation, and there's even talk of maybe having a bourbon hour out in Texas.
Yeah, we're trying to find a venue for that, doing a live bourbon hour out there at a whiskey place or something like that. So if anybody has any recommendations on that, we'll definitely take them. Anyway, I know Frank's got to go.
We'll buy the first round.
Thank you.
I'll chip in. I'm in. So
You're
let me
in?
know.
All right, we'll see
I'm
you there,
in.
Frank.
We'll see you there, guys.
All right,
Thanks a
Tony,
lot, Frank. Nice
thanks
meeting you.
again.
You
Don,
guys
good to
as
see
well.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, pleasure.
See ya.